there's Pear Labs, then there's that whole chicken experiment. You ever heard of that one?
I don't know the chicken experiment.
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
It's prior to Pear Labs. It's this chicken experiment where they took this robot and it basically had a random number generator in it that made it go one way or another, right? Any direction for a little bit, and then a little bit, and a little bit, and it would bounce around. Then they hatched these chickens with it, and they bonded to it. That's its mom. The first thing they see is its mom. It moved, right? And they would follow it around, and they would feed, so they bonded it strongly. And then what they did is they put the random number generator in a open area, and then it had a cage around it, and all the baby chickens that loved it were on one side. They ran the random number generator, and they found out, well, I don't know about found out, but
the results were
that the random number generator moved towards that side more, even though it was supposed to be random. Right away, my thought is, well, okay, did they run it for 5 minutes? Or did they run it for 4 years?
Yeah.
5 minutes, yeah, that random number generator could skew to one side. Totally.
Right.
Even in an hour, it could skew to one side.
It by definition will.
Yeah, well, because it's 360 degrees, right? And it's going to move in the first initial movement, if it moves towards one side, is, I think there's probably a higher likelihood that it's going to stay on that side a little while. I don't know how to call it quite 50-50. Because it have to make it all the way back. The further it makes it to one side, the longer it's going to stay there. So those first few random events are going to keep it on one side. But the point is that this experiment has this suggestion that consciousness, if you believe it's in chickens, and this emotional intent was supposed to influence the random number generator. And then Pear Labs picked that up and it was Princeton, and they did a lot more studying of this random number generator influence, and they said that while the influence is statistically significant, it's not something where you could go to Las Vegas and gamble and win more money. My guess is, I don't know. I'm just curious. It seems weird. It's suspicious.
Yes, suspicion is the right thing to think. Everything I've learned about statistics tells me that this is basically a misunderstanding of the law of large numbers and inference at scale and things like that. Like when you were talking about how long do they run it for, really the question is how many random draws did they do? And you can do random draws with whatever frequency. And any sufficiently long random string will always have subsequences of non-randomness in it. That's a property of being random.
For an example, flip a coin 100 times. You might see 10 flips of heads.
Yeah, there's going to be tons of streaks in there. Little ones, big ones. It would be weird if there wasn't.
Right.
And actually, from a mathematical point of view, if there wasn't... well, anyway, the mathematics...
It would almost be predictable.
So
and if it wasn't... If there weren't streaks, if there weren't streaks, that would imply it was one or the other, and then there would be a pattern.
Right.
It would toggle between the two.
So you have to look more fairly at what your comparisons are, and what ends up happening a lot of times is people fail to recognize that they're making multiple comparisons, or they're counting the hits, forgetting the misses. So, like, there was a project I'm more familiar with that was doing random number stuff and trying to relate it to world politics and saying, like, oh, on 9/11, the random numbers were acting up, and on this date, they were acting up. But you can take any calendar day and find what seems to be an important news item and then map the random number generator to it. So who's to say, you can find any correlation you want if you look hard enough.
And then there's the external effects of solar flares and all that stuff, and random shaking of the earth. As far as I understand it, a bit flip to here or there can
could
cause,
be, yeah.
Something like that. So that's an interesting one. I'd be wondering how they disbanded that lab, Pear Labs.
That's probably for the best.
I'd be wondering how they debunked it, or if they ever did debunk it, or what came of that. I'm just curious, because it was Princeton, right? And
sure,
they gave them the money.
But didn't Princeton also investigate mind control in the 70s? I could have that wrong. There were some Ivy Leagues that were involved in the MKUltra stuff. I mean, universities to some extent should try weird stuff once in a while. Those are the centers of research. And when the weird stuff doesn't pan out, we should move along.
Except also when the government comes and says, hey, can you do an experiment on mind control or remote viewing? Here's $5 million. What are they going to say?
Yeah, we'll take the money.
They're going to say no, right? Oh, you mean I get to buy this very expensive piece of equipment to do the measurements that we can keep forever?
Right.
Okay.
That's the key, yeah. We'll do whatever you want, and we're going to find our own way to advance science. You know, we're going to get an MRI machine, which is useful on its own, and if you want to spend an hour a day doing some weird alien thing, let's do it.
Yep. I mean, they won't say anything about whether or not they believe that it's going to fail, but we'll go through the process to prove that it does. Yeah. It would make sense.
And that's what science is.
Yeah.
You don't want to prove it's going to fail. You want to test it.
Right. Even if you believe it's going to fail, you know, hey, take the time to prove it. Show the data. So
absolutely. I mean, the biggest problem I have with stuff like this is that there is no plausible mechanism where this matters in the world. Like, okay, let's just accept the premise that this random number generator is either predicting or causing certain things. Like, how the heck would that even happen? We have to now think about the you almost have to believe in the simulation hypothesis at that point.
Yeah, and that's what I also thought, and given our last conversation about meditation and biology, that there is, you know, an interesting simulation take on that, but there's definitely a consciousness and simulation take on the random number generation, of course, because if consciousness can influence bits, there has to be a medium in which it's doing so, right?
Right, yeah. If psychic powers are real, they're still within the domain of science.
Right, and you know, in your mind, straight away, we'd be asking, what is the medium of getting information from here to there?
Sure.
Right?
Well, if all else fails, just say it's quantum.
Right. We can talk. Yes, we can. That's a whole other conversation that I don't have time for right now. But it is interesting. Like, if you were in a simulation, I can actually buy the random number generation influence more if you're in a simulation than I can if you're in the physical world. Right.
Right. Because the simulators could have done it on purpose, or it could be a thing they didn't think about that's alluding to the source code.
Right, or you got a buffer overflow somewhere that, you know, holy cow, you were so emotionally bonded to that chicken robot that, you know, you found some subroutine. Oh, we gotta patch that bug, right? It could be a bug in the simulation that occurs rarely. It's an edge case, as we would call it in software. And that whoever created the simulation just doesn't bother patching the edge case.
Well, but as you know, software bugs, even though individual ones are, especially on a mature piece of software, they're often these crazy corner cases that are hard to find. But if you step back and look at them statistically, they're kind of predictable. You can say like, oh, we had one every 6 months, now it's one every 9, and there'll be this decay rate. As long as you don't damage the software at some point with a bunch of screw-ups, you know, the rate at which you find bugs will have this very statistical decay rate. And if the universe is a simulation, that is one possible way of proving it, by showing some sort of inconsistency or variance over time. And I don't believe anyone's ever done that.
Well, that implies that they're fixing bugs.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, maybe if we're stuck, they're not upgrading this firmware anymore, we'd never know.
Right, yeah. This goes back to, did God create the universe, then leave, right? We're just in a petri, not a petri dish, but we're running in some Pentium 10,000 in someone's closet that they forgot about and they left it plugged in.
Why not?
Pentium. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be Pentium, if we're running a simulation, but you get my point.
I just found out why they called it Pentium. It's because before that, you'll remember the 286, 386, 486.
Yeah.
You cannot trademark a number. Thus, Pentium.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. It was first the domain of geeky computer people who, numbers. That makes perfect sense. It's a release version.